All right, hello. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about the kind of organic found objects that we want you to use as inspiration for this next assignment. So I'm going to have you go out into the world and I'm going to have you look around for found organic objects. The found part's pretty obvious. You're going to go out and locate it. The organic part is sometimes a little confusing to folks. The simple definition that I want to use here is that it was alive, has been alive, is part of something that was alive, with alive being the important part. Rocks are not organic objects. I have a lot of students bring in bits of broken rock because they're interesting, and I understand that they're interesting, but they're not organic objects. The reason that I want you to select an organic object is because the act of living or growing requires systems and structures. So when things are grown, they grow in purposeful, important ways. And those things are important, I think, to the beauty of these objects. So I want you to find something that was alive. Don't find anything that is alive. Don't go out and buy a goldfish and torture it for an art project. Don't buy a hermit crab and let it die a horrible death because you want to use it in this sculpture. So was alive is the key element to this organic object thing. So what I want to do is I'm going to show you some things, and I'm going to talk about their merits, and I'm going to talk about the reasons why I think that they have some possible use in this assignment. But before we get to that, I want to talk real quickly. You know, as you select these objects, I want you to be thinking ahead to what this finished composition might look like. And hopefully you've taken a minute and you've looked at all the elements in this module and you have an idea of where we're going with this. We're going to be making a carving. So if you think about stone carvings, one of the first ones that pops up into my mind is the Venus de Milo. And one of the things about that pops up into my mind pretty quickly is that it's missing an arm, right? And the reason is because the kinds of materials that we can carve might be really strong in compression, but they're really weak in tensile strength. They break easily this way. So when you select your object, I need you to think about something that is compact, that doesn't have any appendages sticking out into space. And if it does have appendages, they need to be things that you can think about and describe in terms of being more related or more compressed or more combined. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I want to go ahead and start talking about these things. They're going to fall into groups or categories, so I'll talk about them that way. So I'll get started here. Hang on a minute. So the first category I'm going to talk about is the seashell or shells. And you have to be really careful with seashells because when you use them, they're a pretty cliche image, right? Everybody's had seashells. Everybody knows what a seashell looks like. Everybody has picked one up on the beach or having one given to them, so that they're everywhere, right? And they become a little cliche. They're in a lot of artwork. So if I were going to choose a seashell, I would be pretty careful about how I used it. But I do think seashells are good examples of beautiful organic objects. Notice that this one is fairly compact, right? It's compressed all into this small form. Notice how beautiful it is. I really love these beautiful curves. You know, it's the definition of the S curve where it starts in one direction and moves in another direction and then moves back. The S curve is a beautiful element and it's used a lot in art. I also like the relationship that this thing, that the parts of this thing have to the whole. You know, it's got this little teeny interesting detail down here with these beautiful curved lines. And then that's juxtaposed to this really nice, big, full, swollen area. So I really like seashells. One of the things that I'll mention about this is be very careful if you select an object. Think about why you're selecting it. You know, if you go out into the quad and pick up a sweet gum ball, you know, which is the seed pod of a gum tree, a sweet gum tree, you might find that pretty interesting, but then if you think about it, you might find it interesting because of its texture. And I don't want you to do that. I want you to think about form when you're looking for these organic objects. Now, this seashell has texture, but it would be real easy to eliminate it. It's not the most important aspect about this. So another seashell might be, you know, a form like this. And this is really nice because it has this beautiful negative space that exactly complements this big positive form. I really think that's a really nice kind of form. So this has no texture. So again, avoid texture because texture is hard to carve for one thing. And another thing, I'm not really interested in texture. I'm interested in you being able to see and study form. Oops. And this seashell is a pretty nice example of that. I've got one more seashell here. It's the same sort of thing. Again, I really like the negative spaces. I really like the way these lines combine. I really like the way the curves change from slow to fast. So I think seashell would be a decent category of things that you might use. But again, it's cliche, so be very careful. You know, I saw some pieces done by students where the only thing they had left of the seashell was the little spiral part inside, and that was really beautiful. And I think it was a sort of different way to think about a seashell. If you found very many seashells, you know, a lot of them have holes in them where other creatures have chewed through the shell to get at the juicy part inside. And sometimes you can see glimpses of the structure inside the seashell, and that's a beautiful thing. All right, so seashells are one possibility. Another possibility is bones. This is a vertebrae of a deer, and I think this is a really beautiful object. It's got all kinds of beautiful negative spaces. It's all got all kinds of holes where you can pass through. I think those are beautiful, you know, where the spinal column runs and where other smaller nerves run. And the other thing I like about bones is the way that the bone itself waxes and wanes. It goes from a beautiful thin sharp edge to a beautiful smooth volume, and I really think that's nice. The other thing about bones that I think is really beautiful is that even though you don't know what all these edges and curves and lines do, it's pretty apparent that they are important. It's pretty apparent that they have some purpose or function or usefulness. And I think that adds to their beauty. So bones would be another category that I would think you could be interested in. You know, I've got another little bit of a bone here. I'm not sure what this is. It might be a chicken bone, might be part of somebody's lunch. You might say, well, gee, Vance, that's kind of linear. You know, I thought you told us to avoid linear things. Yeah, all right. So I could eliminate this part and just use this. You know, if you can look at this and imagine it 20 feet high, you know, out of steel, then I think it would make a pretty good found object. You know, and I think that all the curves in the negative spaces and these little lines up here, I think are all opportunities to make interesting changes to a sculptural form. So, you know, I think that's a really nice object, and it's just part of a chicken bone. So we've got shells and bones. Another category that we have that I think could be pretty interesting is fossils. You know, I have a collection of trilobite fossils because these are the coolest things going. You know, this poor guy died with this beautiful arch to his back. So I think there's a lot of sculptural potential there. I also like the fact that these are tri-lobes, right? There's a lobe here, a lobe here, and a lobe here. And I really love how they look in cross-section. You know, they're not curved, but they're sort of shallow, soft angles. And I think those are nice things to see. I love the transition where it fades out into this tail part. I think that's pretty nice. And the heads of trilobites look like little shovels, and I think those are cool. So this was once a living animal, and I think organically it falls into that category. Of course, it was alive. But I think in terms of form, I think it's really complex, and I think it's really beautiful. You know, if I were going to make an abstraction out of this, I probably wouldn't have, you know, 20 or 30 legs. I might break that down into a smaller number, 7 or 9 or something like that. But I could still use the idea to create a beautiful sculpture. So I've got a couple of trilobites here. They roll up like pill bugs when they die. And so I think this guy is really interesting. He's curled up on himself, if you can sort of see that. And I think that makes a really beautiful organic form, you know, where the trilobes back here transition into that sort of big nose with the compound eyes. So I think that's a pretty nice object. And then there's another fossil. I know I'm showing you a lot of trilobites, but this one's cool because you can see the negative and the positive form, and I think that's really nice. Yeah, I've always thought, you know, how do I make something out of that that shows the positive form and the negative space all at the same time? But he's a pretty cool guy too. All right, so in addition to bones and fossils, you know, the next big category I have is plants and plant material. And there is all kinds of stuff in that category. As I was walking out to my barn, I plucked this off of an iris flower. This is a really beautiful little object, and it's the seed pod for an iris. And you can see that this bit up here used to be the flower. It's the spent flower. And then here we've got these big lobed sections, which are really nice. But I love how this big lobe thing is wrapped in this husk. So there's really kind of 3 or 4 things going on here. Now, if I were to make an abstraction out of this, I would probably have to think about this section, because you're not going to be able to carve that long, skinny, narrow piece out of the material we're going to be using. But if I could bend this down maybe and wrap it around so that it touches down on the object, now all of a sudden I can create that illusion of that line, but it's touching down, so now I don't have to worry about it breaking off. So that would be an option to me. So I think this is a really beautiful kind of seed pod. And there are all other manner of seed pods out there. I broke this off of a little Siberian iris that I have, and I really like how this top one didn't open, but yet this one opens, and now I can see the lobes inside there. So it creates a really kind of cool negative space, and you can sort of see, I don't know how I would put this together into a single sculpture, but I sort of like how one's open and one isn't, so maybe I could find a way or think of a way to arrange these into a single image where I could kind of exaggerate that, show that off. So I think that's pretty nice, the way that opens up. But if I don't have irises growing in my yard, what am I going to do? Well, you could go to Bed Bath & Beyond, I suppose, and buy some potpourri, which is where these things came from. This is a seed pod, probably from some endangered plant somewhere in the Far East that's being harvested just so it can show up in your potpourri. But I really like the negative spaces and how they relate to these positive forms. This is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life, and it's just some part of a seed pod. And if this thing were 25 feet high in the quad, out of bronze, it would be the most amazing sculpture you could ever see. So, I think that things like this are really nice. I really like how sharp this edge is. I like how it cuts the light, and then it wraps around to this big full area here, which is really nice. And kind of like a seashell, I like these little details that are important and sharp and curvy in relationship to the big, broad, smoother areas. So I think that's a really nice object. I have more things that are a little closer to home. I have a bur oak here where one of the seeds is missing, but one of them's still there. So I like the relationship between the acorn itself and the cup that it grows in. That's pretty nice. I have this little seed pod like this. This is a beautiful little thing, and it's like this little miniature little canoe. And you might say, well, gee, Vance, it's pretty linear, it's pretty planar. I thought you wanted something compact and solid. But what if this were plastic? What if it were flexible and I could twist it around on itself and bring it back around on itself? Then I could really have all these beautiful characteristics that I like this beautiful slow curve, this sharp edge. I could really have all these characteristics that I like and still maintain that compactness that's going to be important to our sculpture. All right, so I think this is maybe the husk of a buckeye, for all of those of you that are familiar with what a buckeye is. And I think that there's an interesting relationship, but I also like that really kind of smooth, uniform negative space and all this kind of big sort of amorphous shape that's kind of flowing around there. So I think that's kind of interesting. Another category that you could consider would be like crustaceans. I had a guy go to Marsh once and buy a crab and use that. Insects sort of fall into that category too. I love the way insects in their exoskeletons, they have parts that are shaped. So when an insect moves, one part has to blend with another part. So I think that's a possibility for stuff that you can use for found object. So get out there and look around. Don't pick up the first thing you see. Don't pick up the first nut you see. Don't break off the first seed pod you see. The more you invest in this, the more time you spend looking for really interesting and beautiful things, I think the more success you're going to have in this project. Before you go out and look for this thing, I want you to go through the student examples that I have included in this module. There's some really beautiful carvings in there, and I want you to sort of be inspired by those before you go out and look for your own found object. But here are some things to remember. Compactness. You want it to be fairly compact. And looking for beautiful voluminous forms, right? Nice big fat swollen volumes and lines and curves. I'm looking for those sorts of things. Avoid things with appendages. Avoid things that you like just because they're textured. So all right, good luck. I hope you find something really beautiful.